Well, with part 8 this evening, we continue the series on human rights in Slovenia with Maria Velikonja, her gracious help to Slovene nation to understand the happenings in the Second World War. We also comment the consequences for today. We're in year 2026, and I have to make a short introduction for today's part. Title: The Army Slovenia Forgot, the Slovenian National Army in Second World War. Namely, today was the press conference of a mayor of Ljubljana, who is basically a Serb by heritage and by behavior. And even today, he reiterated his stance on the question of burial of the remains of the Slovenian National Army, which Maria will describe later. And since it's Slovene National Army and the Serbian mayor is declining the proper burial in Ljubljana on Cemetery Žale, where many other nations have their soldiers buried, may it be after the First World War or the Second one. He repeated his key arguments, which are: Ljubljana is the hero city. They always, every time they sing Hey Brigade, which is rather famous partisan song of a feisty one. And the main argument is that the partisans were, in his view, fighting against two biggest threats to humanity, which are, quote, Nazism and fascism. He never, of course, mentions communism. And that those fighting against the partisans were simply traitors. And what I heard from Maria before we prepared for today's session part was that Maria will also introduce the question of who, in effect, was a traitor and why. So, Maria, thank you for enlightening Slovenian nation with a legal debate that enables us to see things much more clearly with objective distance. So I give the word and floor to you. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Blaž. For those who are new listening, the focus of our discussions, certainly my discussions, have been on examining the legal nature of World War II. And I'm currently discussing legal characterizations of the armies that were operational during World War II. This is a topic that I find virtually absent from discussions and books, historian books in the last 80 years. And I hope that I can interject this important, not point of view, but it's certainly very important when examining the history of Slovenia and the region. Last time I went over my approach to doing a legal characterization of armies. Today I'm going to focus on what Blaž has just said, the Slovene National Army, SNV. And if I'd like to touch on the legal characterization of the Slovenian Chetniks toward the end, because that's an important entry into what I want to discuss next week, which is who is a traitor. Is that relevant? Who is a traitor during the war? And I will be discussing the partisan army in that context. But I have to give the background and the legal characterizations and the way that it is analyzed before I can launch into something like that. So, first of all, I understand from Blaž that many people in Slovenia were not aware of what this was, the Slovene National Army. Certainly those of us who have, in the United States, who had fathers who were in the Slovene National Army are well aware of this, and I have been aware of it my entire life. But it is a new concept for many people, so I'll start at the beginning of it. I'll start with the summary, and then I'm going to give some details. So I'm going to refer to it as the SNV, or the Slovene National Army. It should be characterized as a Slovenian anti-communist national military organization whose development extended from wartime consolidation of anti-communist armed formations. And this began already in 1943, not 1945 when it was formalized. And this began through the clandestine military organization, also associated with Vladimir Vauhnik in 1944, but also began in 1943. Its ultimate objective was to unite the non-communist Slovenian armed formations under one common Slovenian command and to constitute the armed force of a proposed Slovenian political authority within a restored democratic and federal Yugoslavia under King Peter II. So it was the intent of the armies, former village guards, home guards, Primorska domobranci, the Slovene Chetniks, the former Yugoslav Army members, all to join the Slovene National Army. And these discussions began in 1943. They had to be secret, of course, because there were occupiers around who would certainly not have approved of this idea. Its public emergence in May 1945 should be understood not necessarily as the creation of a new military organization, but as the culmination and the attempted implementation of a pre-existing organizational and political project. So it did not simply appear in the final days of May 1945. It emerged in 1943, and this was emerged because of the anticipation of the collapse of Italian control and the possibility of an Allied landing on the Eastern Adriatic. In fact, one reads the memoirs, certainly the book that I'm writing on my father, the discussions of the Home Guard, or before they were the Home Guard, they constantly talk about when the Allies are coming. And we planned to join them. They had planned actually to fight with the Allies against the Germans and against the partisans. So it's not surprising that they wanted to form a Slovenian army and make it formal. They involved the armies which I listed, and the historical accounts report that by late July 1943, these anti-communist forces were being referred to among the members as the SNV, or the Slovene National Army, and it was conceived that it would be part of the Royal Yugoslav Army. At the time, of course, the Royal Yugoslav Army, or the Chetniks, the Army, Royal Yugoslav Army in the Homeland, was still the official army of Yugoslavia. Boris Mlakar, his research is vital and very useful here because it's based on archival material, not just on post-war memoirs, and both are useful. The context was the impending Italian capitulation of September 1943. The anti-communist forces, of course, anticipated that the Italians would withdraw, and that would radically alter the military situation in Slovenia. The existing village guards, who had been organized under Italian-sponsored MVAC, or Militia Volontaria Anticomunista system, but their political and military leadership did not regard their future as dependent upon Italy. So instead, they contemplated converting the existing anti-communist forces into a Slovenian national military organization capable of confronting the partisans and, if the Allies landed, presenting itself to the Western Allies as a Slovenian Yugoslav national military force. Blockart notes that the anti-communist leadership had connections with Draža Mihailović, head of the Chetniks, and the Minister of War then at the time, and the Allied-oriented Yugoslav royalist structure. And that the legal and also illegal military or undercover military units were organized under the Slovenian National Army in anticipation of Italy's collapse. However, this project did not go as planned. When Italy capitulated on September 8, 1943, the anti-communist formations found themselves in a rapidly changing military environment. Partisan forces immediately moved against them, while German forces occupied the territory formerly controlled by Italy. Major anti-communist concentrations were attacked in Turiak and other locations, Zapotek. The destruction or capture of many of the village guards and the royalist formations disrupted the first attempt to establish the Slovenian National Army as a functioning unified army. They were left with surviving anti-communist forces, and they felt forced to reorganize in a different way. In Ljubljana, the Slovene Home Guard was established in 1943 in September, while the remaining royalist Chetnik formations continued to operate separately. So, the first 1943 Slovenian National Army should historically be understood as an organizational and political project that suffered a major military collapse in September 1943. It was not a continuously functioning national army because they were simply not able to move ahead with their organization. Nevertheless, the existence of this project is very significant because the concept of the Slovene National Army did not disappear. The next major stage came in 1944 when it was taken up within the clandestine structure of the Royal Yugoslav military in Slovenia. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brigadier General Vladimir Vauhnik, but in 1944, he was serving as acting commander of the Yugoslav Army in Slovenia, and using a pseudonym, because he often acted undercover, General Račić, he issued a confidential order concerning the organization of a Slovenian National Army. The surviving document is in the Military History Institute archives in Belgrade, and it established a military council within the command structure and contemplated coordination among different anti-communist military components. The documentary evidence shows, therefore, that the Slovenian National Army concept was not merely a post-war construction of emigres. It was being pursued clandestinely during the war by an officer who had authority within the Royal Yugoslav military structure. And this is very significant because the Royal Yugoslav Army, the Chetniks, this army that began in 1941 under Mihailović, remained legally as the legal force of Yugoslavia throughout the end of the war. Now, people may dispute that. You can argue that because in 1944, the Allies recognized the partisans, but that's more of a political recognition. They remained legally the legal army of Yugoslavia. So, Vauhnik, being the brigadier general in Slovenia, the fact that he's purporting this is vital. His initiative in 1944 demonstrates that he wasn't simply attempting to create an autonomous militia. He was operating within the organizational framework of the Yugoslav Army in Slovenia, and also within the broader military structure which claimed allegiance to King Peter II and the Yugoslav government in exile. His April 1944 order also contemplated a military council whose composition appears to have been intended to bridge the principal anti-communist military currents. The surviving evidence indicates that Vauhnik subsequently left Slovenia in 1944 amid German arrests, and the organization continued to evolve without him because there were many others working on it as well. So, moving on, and later in the war, late 1944 and early 1945, the political dimension of the project of the Slovenian National Army became very important. The National Committee for Slovenia, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, sought to establish a political authority capable of representing the non-communist Slovenian political forces and also of presenting itself to the Western Allies as the legitimate Slovenian political leadership. The military component of this project was the Slovenian National Army. Again, Boris Mlakar, in his research, identified a draft decree concerning the establishment of the Slovenian National Army dated January 4, 1945. That was followed by a decree adopted by the Political National Committee on January 21, 1945. This January decree provided for a formal military organization and, importantly, altered the proposed Supreme Command. Rather than making the National Committee itself the Supreme Commander, the final version designated King Peter II as the Supreme Commander, with the National Committee exercising the functions of the normal command until they could restore normal constitutional conditions. This 1945 decree in January also provides direct evidence of the intended political allegiance of the Slovene National Army. Article 10 of this decree stated that members of the Slovene National Army would swear loyalty to the king and the Slovenian nation. And in fact, many of the soldiers in the Home Guard swore an oath to the king in January 1945. My father was one of them. This was elaborated on in April 5, 1945, regulation on the organization of the Slovene National Army, whose prescribed oath pledged allegiance and obedience to King Peter II as the Supreme Commander. They pledged loyalty to the Slovenian nation and service to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. This April 1945 regulation also contemplates a conventional military hierarchy, including commanders of armies, divisions, brigades, and so on. These documents are very important because they demonstrate what? That the Slovene National Army was not conceived just as an informal alliance of anti-communist units, but it was formally structured as a national military organization. And as I said, surviving copies are available in the Military History Archive in Belgrade. The relationship between the Slovene National Army and the existing anti-communist formations was nevertheless complicated. The Slovene Home Guard, the Royalist formations, Primorska Domobranci, and other regional formations, they also had clandestine military networks, clandestine intelligence networks. They all have different histories. They have different command structures. And so the January and April Slovenian National Army documents sought to place all these forces within a common national military structure. So if we want to accurately, historically say what the Slovenian National Army was and what it sought to unify and absorb all the existing anti-communist military formations. They didn't continuously operate till 1943. I'm not saying that. It was a plan, but there were many things going on, and there were occupiers that got in the way a lot. This distinction is particularly important in assessing the Home Guard, whose military relationship with the German authorities is different from the royalist formations, and this historical evidence supports continuity of the Slovene National Army, but not necessarily an uninterrupted institutional continuity of it. So, moving on to May 3, 1945, when a decisive political moment came. While the German forces were withdrawing, the partisan Yugoslav forces were advancing, and the National Committee convened a political assembly in Ljubljana. The assembly proclaimed a Slovenian national state as part of a democratically and federally organized Kingdom of Yugoslavia and established the National Committee as the provisional Slovenian government. This proclamation explicitly stated that the Slovene National Army would maintain order in Slovenia, defend the Slovenian state, and that this would no longer exist. They had placed themselves at the disposal of the National Committee, and they entered, the members who were allowed to enter, not all of them were, those who entered the Slovene National Army, and those who were in the Royal Yugoslav Army all submitted to this process and became part of the Slovene National Army. The same political transformation brought a change in military command. Under the Home Guard, Leon Rupnik had commanded the Slovene Home Guard. He relinquished that position on that day following discussions with the National Committee. And Franz Krenar was appointed to command the Slovene National Army. That's why I'm jumping ahead a bit in a sentence here or two. That's why when the anti-communists fled to Austria, and I won't say it, the Home Guard, they were actually members of the Slovene National Army, went to discuss and negotiate with the British. It was Krenar who was there. It was not Leon Rupnik. And that's because they had already become the Slovene National Army. What's clear about this May 3 political proclamation is that it attempted to transform all the separate anti-communist formations into a single Slovenian National Army operating under the authority of the newly proclaimed Slovenian political government. So, this May 3 proclamation is especially important because it makes explicit what had been implicit in earlier documents. It was intended to be a national army, not an army of German occupation authorities. Its stated constitutional allegiance was to King Peter and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. The proclamation called upon partisan forces to cease hostilities against the Slovene National Army, and it appealed for national reconciliation. This could probably be termed a political experiment because it only lasted a few days. The National Committee never obtained effective control over Slovenia at that late date, and the advancing partisan forces took control of Ljubljana and the rest of Slovenian territory. So, the Slovene National Army consequently entered its final phase almost immediately after its proclamation. Its military formations went northward to Carinthia, they went to Austria, along with many of the Slovenian refugees. But as I said quickly earlier, the historical terminology becomes important. Sources sympathetic to the anti-communist side emphasize that the men who withdrew were now soldiers of the Slovene National Army rather than Home Guards. Other historians continue to refer to them all as Home Guards because the bulk of the force came from the Home Guard, and also because the formal Slovene National Army reorganization was very short-lived. By the time the formations reached Vetring, the Slovene National Army's political and military project had effectively failed. The Western Allies did not recognize the National Committee as the government of Slovenia, and the Slovene National Army did not acquire the territorial control or international recognition that its leaders had hoped would follow by approaching the British and requesting protection. The British subsequently transferred them to Yugoslav authorities, and we know what happened when we've discussed this. I want to comment upon this about the Western Allies not recognizing the National Committee. They did so, and I'll go over some other history, but that is because they had already recognized the partisans. But that doesn't change the legal characterization of the Slovene National Army. And that's what I'm attempting to make a point here. There's politically what happens. There's political people. Armies are recognized politically by the Allies, but it doesn't change the legal nature of an army. All right, so I mentioned that the Allies had chosen the partisans. They had had the Tito Subasic government by spring 1945. The international political situation was essentially settled against the National Committee's project because they had already decided in advance that the Allies needed the Soviets, and therefore they had to use the partisans in order to defeat the Nazis. The Tito-Subasic agreement resulted in the creation of a unified Yugoslav government in March 1945. The Allies recognized this arrangement as the legitimate Yugoslav governmental framework, and as Blaž Babič explains, the March 1945 formation of the common Yugoslav government effectively ended the political influence of King Peter, his previously independent government. And this meant that the National Committee faced a fundamental diplomatic problem. There was already an Allied recognized Yugoslav government structure. They could proclaim a Slovenian government, but they couldn't make the international community recognize them by making that proclamation. So, the significance of this, though, is how do we legally characterize the Slovene? The question is not what was the Slovene National Army during a few days in 1945. I would say what was the legal nature of the Slovene National Army as it developed from 1943 through May 1945 and did its legal character change over that period. As I said at the beginning, it should be characterized as a long-developing Slovenian anti-communist military organization that sought to become the national armed force of a proposed democratic Slovenian government within a restored federal Yugoslavia under King Peter II. Its relationship with Home Guard is important, but it's also distinguished from that because so many of the members came from the Home Guard. But then the Slovene National Army became an umbrella or national military organization. What's important to analyze here is that the relationship of the Germans, as far as the Home Guard is concerned, needs to be analyzed separately from the Slovene National Army. Since the Slovene National Army existed as an independent organizational project before May 1945, we cannot infer its legal character by military relationships with German or Italian occupation authority. So it's a separate force. It's not associated with the Germans. Individual conduct, again, is important regarding particular members. If a particular Home Guard unit cooperated military with German forces, that doesn't necessarily establish that the Slovene National Army as an organization was a German auxiliary. Likewise, if the Slovene National Army sought to organize itself as a Yugoslav or Slovenian national force under King Peter II, that political and military objective could legally be relevant to its characterization, independent of the occupier's relationship with the particular constituent unit. I wouldn't describe the Slovene National Army as a de facto organized armed force seeking lawful belligerent status during the final days of the Second World War. It was, as I said at the beginning, should be characterized as an anti-communist national military organization whose development began in 1943, extended to 1945. Its objective was to unite non-communists under a common Slovenian command, unassociated with the Germans, and supporting the federal Yugoslav government under King Peter II. It should be looked at as a culmination, attempted implementation of this pre-existing organizational political project. So I would argue that it was lawful. It had belligerent status. It never became the National Army of Slovenia because political events overtook it, and the Allies had politically already decided to support the partisans. But the Slovenian National Army, you can't fault them for not receiving diplomatic recognition. Krenner and National Committee went to the British in Austria, and they attempted to get that national recognition. That was their intent, to represent Slovenia, a more democratic Slovenia and Yugoslavia, and King Peter II. But they simply were not able to carry it out due to political forces beyond them. All right, I want to then talk a little bit about the Chetniks. So now we're going back to 1941. The Slovenian Chetniks they were a very interesting organization because their legal status changed over time more than other armed forces. Unlike the village guards and the home guards, they claimed continuity with the pre-war Yugoslav armed forces. And they initially derived their authority from the Yugoslav government in exile through General Draža Mihailović, who until August 1984 was the Minister of War. So the Chetniks should be categorized as the part of the legal army of Yugoslavia, certainly until August 1944. Arguably, yes, after that, certainly they had the status of a legal army, even though politically the winds had changed. So they were the regular army for most of the war. They were partially insurgents. They fought both the occupiers and the communist-led partisans. They did not seek to overthrow the lawful government of Yugoslavia. They did resist the de facto revolutionary authorities established by the partisans. They were also resistance fighters. And I'm going through a checklist, I should say. When I look at each army and I'm analyzing every one of them, I ask the question of whether the army was a regular army, were they insurgents, were they resistance fighters, were they guerrillas, were they lawful combatants, were they the Chetniks, Slovenian Chetniks, were resistance fighters because their declared objective included restoring the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and resisting foreign occupation. They were also can be characterized as guerrillas because they operated largely through irregular warfare, particularly in the early years of the conflict. Remembering, of course, that the Royal Yugoslav Army and then the Chetniks were essentially cut off from the rest, from the Minister of War with Croatia in between, with the independent state of Croatia. And so they were engaging in irregular warfare, largely due to that. Were they lawful combatants? Yes. If they are regarded as part of the Yugoslav Royal Army, they have one of the strongest legal claims to lawful combatant status among the non-Axis forces in Slovenia. Were they the de facto government forces? No, because they didn't exercise governmental authority over Slovenian territory comparable to non-wartime. I mean, they just didn't have control over the government. Their status and the analysis changed over time. In 1941, they were not yet an organized military force. In 1942, they organized themselves as part of Mihailovic's Yugoslav Army in the Homeland. Still part of the regular army, resistance fighters, lawful combatants. 1943, following the Italian capitulation, the Slovenian Chetniks, they continue fighting. They continue claiming allegiance to the Yugoslav government in exile. Mihailović is still the Minister of War. There's still the regular army, resistance fighters, guerrilla fighters, lawful combatants, yes. In 1944, there's two periods because, of course, Mihailović was dismissed. So at the beginning of 1944, it continues like as in 1943. After August 1944, King Peter II dismissed him. It changes the legal analysis. The claim to being a regular army becomes weaker. They remained an organized armed force, and their lawful combatant status did not necessarily disappear just because the political recognition changed. This is why it's important to separate legal status from political recognition, because politically we'll say, no, they weren't lawful. The allies are siding with the partisans. But from a legal combatant standing under international law of war, they still are legal combatants. By 1945, the government in exile no longer recognized Mihailović, and Tito's government was increasingly representing Yugoslavia International. So therefore, the Slovenian Chetniks were not a regular army. They were still resistance fighters. They were still guerrillas. And they were still lawful combatants because their combatant status depends on the law of armed conflict rather than diplomatic recognition. They're not the de facto government. So but a question arises on what is their relationship with the occupiers. The Slovenian Chetniks professed allegiance to King Peter II, Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and this on paper distinguishes them from the village guard and the home guard, although the home guard also swore allegiance to King Peter secretly from the Germans. However, the Chetnik units were tactically cooperating with Italian and German occupying forces. I should say something here about this. This isn't a legal definition. This is more a political definition that historians and philosophers discuss in discussing what cooperation or collaboration is. There's a difference between tactical cooperation and true collaboration. A true collaborationist force with the Nazis would be one that believed in the Nazi state, that wanted the country, wanted to join Nazi Germany, and supported their goals. Tactical describes armies that find themselves in the position of needing to cooperate with an occupier, which was done all over Europe, by the way. All kinds of resistance fighters are tactically cooperating with occupiers from time to time for certain short-term purposes. The Home Guards found the need to tactically cooperate with the Germans because they needed arms to save themselves and to fight the partisans. This is their argument. Partisans also tactically cooperated with the Germans. When they say in 1944, 1945, the Germans, they wanted easy passage through Primorska. They didn't want a lot of presence. They made agreements not to fight each other. Also, the Germans allowed partisans and partisan sympathizing administrative units in Primorska to start operating. There were people supported by the partisans that were running the government in Primorska after the Italians left, and they couldn't have done that without tacit tactical cooperation with the Germans. It certainly wouldn't be possible. So that's clearly they were doing that as well. And by saying this, I'm not equating a collaboration or cooperation with the Home Guards obtaining weapons with partisans establishing certain agreements with the Germans, maybe in less broader terms, more specific ways of collaboration. I'll let historians argue about that. My points are only to make legal comparison and draw out legal issues. So I can talk more about this, but at this point, Blaž, do you have some comments you want to make about all this?
How did you figure that out? Of course, I have.
Mm-hmm.
Namely, there is a lot to discuss. I've checked some YouTube videos and came to the numbers that in France there were a few thousand killed in post-war end massacres of collaborators, and also the other video. I'm trying to compare it with Slovenia all the time, and also I watched a YouTube video on Latvian collaborators of SS, and after the war they were court-martialed, and for example they performed or helped to perform the mass execution of Jews in Riga,
Mm-hmm.
and there were 300.
That's a war crime.
Sure, and 300 were indicted, processed at the court, and the interesting number is the number of those who were sentenced to death.
Yeah.
Out of 330. Okay, so this goes along with your argument that all the criminal responsibility should be individualized.
Yes.
Now, Vauhnik. I was watching before and I added a link to Franz Krener, and for the first time I checked this wiki page. I have not focused on Franz Krener before. So, and him and Vauhnik as well are completely undisclosed in average Slovenian historian narrative. So he was a spy, actually was a Slovenian James Bond.
Yes.
And
In fact, there was a discussion by the independent researcher Ivo Jevnikar at Pivka last year entitled "The Slovenian James Bond."
yeah.
About Vauhnik.
So, but his side, as he was too cunning for the Nazis, then the fate revolved around, and his side was outsmarted, outplayed by the communists. And I have put an interesting picture from an article, I believe it was in Seoul, by Aleš Žužek, who is guilty of other intellectual crimes against Slovenian history. But this article on Vauhnik was interesting enough. And there was a picture of the map of the intelligence network that Vauhnik upheld. And there was a strong connection to Italy. And as you described before, the Home Guards and the anti-communist side had intensive contacts with British and allies.
Yes, and Vauhnik altogether.
So to conclude my comments today, in the last weeks, I like to show the the comparison. Namely, okay, we have now 8 billion people on the planet, and in the Second World War, let's say there were 6 or 5 billion people on the earth, and Slovenes are 1.5, not 2 in Slovenia itself. And I'm always wondering how many Slovenians actually there are, because in Slovenia we don't have official numbers now, because we don't have a proper census on nationalities, and Slovenia being occupied by 5 forces, hostile forces, namely, we discussed that already, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Croatia, and the communists. We are extremely unique, and of course, nobody cared about this small, in numbers, nation, but the effects of the Second World War in general were totally genocidal. The percentage of healthy male population declined, and after the Second World War, many migrants from the south, from ex-Yugoslavia, had to be taken in, and the replacement in Slovenia took place already after the Second World War. So these are my comments for now. Yeah.
Can I mention, if anyone is interested in learning more about this secret underground intelligence network that is connected to Vladimir Vauhnik, I'm putting on a tour, I think you've mentioned, beginning on September 28th. On October 1st, we're going to have an expert discussing that at Slovenska Matica in the evening at 6 p.m. I'll send you something, but people can sign up through Družina for this discussion. Or they might just be able to come. I'm not sure. So I'll send you a link for that. People are interested in learning more about it. This is a topic that I research as well because my father was involved with it. This week I found a very interesting link in Trieste, and maybe I'll be able to talk about it more after I learn more about it. But it's fascinating.
May I add just one more? In this week, I learned there was a short, beautiful amateur documentary made by girls from Carinthia, that's Koroška, South Austria, which was ancestral homeland of Slovene nation. Like, for example, Kosovo was treated by Serbs as a cradle. But Koroška, I mean, the funny part of this documentary, or cynical one for me, was that they even had Slovene women, and the whole documentary goes about that so little people nowadays speak Slovene in Carinthia. It's a minority and so on. And even those ladies, which had to be, I'm sorry, woke or something, they were concerned about the migrants from there of some of them. And this is my general grudge against the left. Again, mentioning today there are 8,000 million people on planet Earth, and only 1.5 approximately are Slovenes.
So I think they're more like 2 million, no?
How many?
More like 2 million, no?
No. There are 2 million citizens.
Yeah.
The problem is that nation is in decline, and we are losing the track of numbers. We don't have national numbers since 2002.
Yeah.
And the census, the practical on foot census costs around 20 million euros. That's 2 million per year. And my strong belief is that we need one ASAP. It doesn't cost so much to have the numbers, and since we don't have the numbers, we cannot claim the existence of genocide in practice. I'm sorry, these are cruel facts, and we have been warning public about this a lot. So for how long will Slovenia have to take care about everyone else but Slovenes? That's my primary question.
I agree that a census is important. In the United States, we have one every 10 years.
We had it since Maria Theresia and through Tito's time as well, but they finished it on 2002. They changed the rules in 2007, and since then we did not have census numbers on nationality and religion, as if somebody would like to hide something like the replacement project.
All right, I'd like to talk a
These
little
are
about
true
the
facts.
oath.
Yeah,
All right, I want to talk about the oaths that were given for a few minutes
please.
before we finish. Yeah, I read a lot about the significance of the Home Guards swearing an oath to Germany in when in 1944 did that start? Do you know off the top of your head? It was televised. Okay.
Yeah.
It was actually done every month after that too. I don't know if people realize that it violates international law for an occupier to require other forces in the country to take an oath. But I mean, obviously they're under pressure to do so. But however, the Home Guards were simultaneously taking another oath. So in January 1945, they gave an oath to the German authorities because the Germans insisted on it. But what Slovene Home Guard had taken an oath to King Peter and the Slovenian National Army. That's what they really believed. And it was not administered by the Home Guard. It was administered by the Slovenian Legion. But what is interesting is that these same personnel are simultaneously conducting intelligence operations against the Germans. They're passing that information on to the Germans. A lot of literature describes how Home Guard intelligence personnel who were secretly monitoring German military movements transmitted this information to the British, including British MI6 network and also American OSS, which is CIA in Switzerland. In fact, I have about 100 of these telegrams that came and went to MI6. Whether they're still classified or not, still I don't know, but I have copies of them. The point is that the German authorities knew that this activity existed. The historical accounts specifically connect German insistence upon a January 1945 oath that the Home Guards are required to take because they discovered Home Guard personnel who had been spying on them, spying on the German military. They caught a number of them. A number of them were given radio transmitters, and some of these transmitters, were given to them by the British. And they were caught by German authorities. The Germans quite frequently went through Home Guard ranks searching for radio sets and transmitters, which they tried to hide because they were transmitting information actually to the British. They had started in Cairo earlier in the war, but they realized that was compromised because there was a British mole in Cairo. And then they changed their communication system and went elsewhere, but they were always communicating with the Chetniks, the Home Guard, had a direct communication with the Chetniks. So my point here is that this is a very significant legal or historical characterization. The timing of the German demand for swearing an oath from the Home Guard is because they found a number of radio sets, and they were alarmed because they realized that a lot of the Home Guards are spying on them. So we need to look at these Home Guards are then the Slovenian National Army, who are gathering German military intelligence for the British while publicly serving in a German-controlled Home Guard formation. We cannot simply view their conduct by characterizing them as a formal German command relationship. We have to look at the formal organizational relationship, the actual command, their individual conduct, their political allegiance. Political allegiance is very important. Their intelligence activity and purpose of the activity. I don't know if I ever said that. I met about 30 Home Guards at one lunch in 1994, kind of coincidentally. I was with my uncle, Tina Velikonja, who was a member of parliament at the time. I was just visiting him on my day off. I was working at the ICTY in Bosnia and Zagreb, and I would take a train sometimes to Ljubljana train station. My uncle would pick me up, and on this day, he drove me straight to a luncheon. There were about 30 people there. I remember that Blaž Babič was there. So I took the opportunity to talk to each one of them, and because I knew they're all home guards, and I asked their what did they think of the Germans? What was their opinion? You know, I'm an investigator. I like to know. I didn't know as much about it back then. And each and every one of them said, we hated the Germans. We had no choice. We didn't want to fight. We didn't want to be on the side of the Germans. So my point is that any investigator in any kind of international tribunal, when reviewing legal issues with regard to criminality or corroboration or whatever you're looking at, the political allegiance and the opinion of an individual soldier is very important. I'm not sure how many of these historians on the other side have actually asked people that question, but in my mind is extremely important. And then another fact to consider, whether when we're saying were they, what was their purpose, the Home Guards, in collaborating or swearing an oath to the Germans, is that the Germans were executing them, and they executed a number of those who were directly spying against them. I don't have all the names off the top of my head, but two of the people my father worked with in Primorska were executed. I know that certainly, and they were taken to German concentration camps and gassed. Another one was put in the crematorium in San Saba. That was Jože Golec, very important figure, a journalist who worked with Vauhnik. And these were the people who were transmitting and directly working with the British and the Allied authorities. And a number of them lost their lives. Another one, Peterlin, in 1943, was discovered by the Germans as well. So this is really strong corroborating evidence that Germans were detecting, arresting, executing Home Guard personnel involved in intelligence activities. And this just proves it's strong evidence that these were not just occasional Home Guards, Vauhnik here and there. This was a large, organized, clandestine, international network. And actually, the British were known for that. They were reaching out to any groups they could fight the Nazis with. I mean, they did that with the partisans. They did it with the Home Guards. I mean, that's not unusual if you think about it in that way. They would try to get them to do whatever they could. One of the early telegrams from MI6, and I have this document that goes directly to through the telegram, and the person sending the telegram was one of the people most significant in the National Committee and the Slovenian Legion, Miloš Stare, who was known by code name as Prikazan in these telegrams. The British specifically asked him to create 3 intelligence agencies in Italy. Now, if any of you know much about government and intelligence collection, that is an enormous request of someone. That isn't just a drug, and I have worked this, right? So, a small informant might be on drugs, might just want a little bit of payment, just asking for a little information. This is not what we're talking about here. To establish intelligence networks in an entire country, all without occupiers finding you out. I mean, this is obviously coming from someone very well trained. Like you said, the James Bond, Vauhnik, trained in this, is obviously passing on this training to these Slovenians who are operating either in the Home Guard. Most of them were part of had been Yugoslav Army, and are part of the Slovenian Chetnik formations. But there are also people like Jože Golec, who are journalists. They really established quite an impressively complex setup. I continue to research it as others do. Anyway, the point is, and I want to conclude here because it has been 1 hour now, that we cannot simply look at the oaths by the Home Guards as that, therefore they're a collaborating force. First of all, collaboration isn't a crime in and of itself. unless your prior is to round up 300 Jewish people and have them executed. Well, that's a war crime. That's different. But
no.
Right.
Thousand or much more
Sorry.
Jewish were killed, but 300 were prosecuted after the war.
That's what you said. Sorry. And as I've said in previous sessions, it's not the collaboration that's the crime, it's what they did that is the crime. So it is too simplistic to say Home Guards collaborated with the Germans, therefore they are guilty of this and this and this. And all this evidence that so many of them were involved in clandestine intelligence activities, especially Primorska Home Guard, which I can get into in another session. This has to be part of also the political considerations, World War II, and the discussion. But it very much changes. It changes the legal status of them as well. So I'm going to end it there, and I will continue with this next week.
Thank you very much. Let me just add that what you described at the last will also change the political perspective of what was going on. And in this sense, I have also put a link below the space itself to an article where Bogo Zupancic discusses the citizenship. The township of as original sin, namely two aspects are most striking out of this article. First one was that three important architects in Slovenia before the Second World War, they all believed that Slovenes were Etruscans by origin, namely Ivan John Jager, Max Fabiani, and Jože Plečnik. And when tourists come to see Plečnik's arcade and the market, I gladly explain to the people that these pillars are not Roman, but actually Etruscan style, because Plečnik definitely was in living this knowledge and expressing it. And also in this article, you will see what the communists hated, the townspeople and their styles before the war in the 30s. And the other funny or remarkable part of this article is the description of which communist leaders took over which bourgeois villas in post-war Ljubljana. So my thesis is that communists were big collaborators, the first collaborators, because they collaborated with Kominterna, the Soviet international communist network, and they were heftily rewarded after the war, and their networks are with less and less quality, still persevering through today. And we have mentality installed in general public, which has almost none of the knowledge that Maria is trying to pass on to us here, at least in English. So if anyone has any short comment or question, please, now this is the time. Otherwise, as always, we will say goodbye until next Tuesday. And Maria, next Tuesday, I believe, is the very question of the role of partisans.
Yes.
Or communists.
Yes.
Their relation towards the old country, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia.
Yes.
were they? Please explain shortly, and then thank you.
I will develop it more this week, but I want to ask the question. People like to ask the question of on army being a traitor, and I will discuss what it means to be a traitor and who might have been, and I will discuss both the partisans and the home guards.
Thank you. So for now, Slovenska narodna vojska, Slovenian National Army, still lies unburied in 2026. And this shows that Slovenia is still not liberated as the state of Slovene nation, has influences from other occupiers or nations, like explicitly Serbian mayor of Ljubljana. So we have much to do if we want to rescue the memory and the future of Slovenian nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.